Hey, everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue Podcast. On this episode, we have a return guest, Mr. Myron Vernis, author of A Quiet Greatness, or one of the co-authors of A Quiet Greatness, which is basically the definitive photographic journey on JDM car. It's one of the best volume series of JDM automobiles that I've ever seen, and it's probably one of the most well-curated ones ever made. So how are you doing?
Hey, doing great. Hey, thanks for the kind words about the book. We have 200,000 words interspersed with all those 2,200 images too. So there's a little bit of education.
It's a lot of education on that.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Oh, of course. So on this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about collecting, about getting into the hobby. And Myron, you have such an eclectic collection. And I think one of the things that people don't understand is, one, you really don't have to have an enormous amount of money to get into this hobby. And two, it's okay to look at things outside the norm, things that are a little more eclectic, a little more fun, and, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. My first collector car was a Porsche 356, a 63 Porsche 356B. It was $1,500 only because it had a fresh paint job and a rebuilt engine. Unfortunately, I only had $900 to my name. I was 19 years old. My dad wouldn't loan me the extra $600. I had to get creative with that. But the 356 got me because they were reasonable at the time. Nobody wanted 356s in the mid 70s. Everyone was hot for 911s. And today, you see what the 356 market is doing. If you're in it for the long haul, but they're just as much fun. Listen, I'm not buying $1,500 356s anymore, but I'm still buying cars for $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to give me just as much joy as an expensive car.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It's interesting as time goes by, we see where kind of trends have gone, right? And I look at it more along the lines from the muscle car standpoint. Like, I remember when you could pick up a Fox body Mustang, and it was, $2,000, $3,000 for one that was, almost okay. $5,000 would have gotten you the nicest one in the country. And now they're 18 to 25 to 35, depending on which year, what model you get. So it's crazy in that respect.
Right. And the fun to dollar ratio is kind of what you have to look at. You can have just as much fun with a cheap car as with an expensive one. And, unless you're just filthy rich, you don't worry about trashing it or making mistakes, not driving it the way it should be, having the fun that you should be having with it. I know your last two podcasts have been involved with driving collector cars, and that's where the passion is and the joy is. And that's that I've always held that to me. When I had my first 356, which I still have 47 years later, at 48 years actually, it was my primary car. I drove that. I don't know how many miles I drove it. I'd like to measure it in 3 engines and 2 transaxles year round in Akron, Ohio. And so I still drive old cars every day. I think I don't know if I mentioned it last time I was on the podcast. My daily driver is a $5,000 Infiniti M30 that I bought on Hemmings auctions about 3 years ago in Los Angeles.
Right.
Matt Farah picked it up for me, had it prepped. We flew out, drove it home through Route 66. It's still my daily driver.
I think that is such a great point, because, it's like, and I say this a lot, like the newest car that I own is 20 years old, or 21 years old, actually, and I enjoy them just as much as I enjoy some of the other stuff, some of the more high dollar stuff, which I bought, like you, when it wasn't high dollar, right? Like you see things that you look at, and for whatever the reason, it sparks interest in you, and you're like, well, that's kind of cool. I either like the way it looks, or it stirs some emotion in me, or you just like, well, that would probably be a great daily driver,
Right.
And
right,
so
absolutely.
everybody out there that thinks they have to go out and spend a ton of cash to enjoy a vehicle or to get into the hobby, they are just completely wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, there's some very cool, expensive cars out there too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could say I've never bought a car that was more expensive than my house, but I'd be lying to you. But again, the $3,000 cars are just as exciting to me now. And my oldest car up until about 3 months ago was that Infiniti. newest car. Sorry, it was a 91 Infiniti. That was
Yeah.
my newest car. I imported a 98 Toyota from Japan a few months ago. So that now I have a 98. So I have a 25-year-old car.
You're getting crazy now. This is,
Now wait, no, wait a minute. It has cup holders. This is the first car I've ever owned with cup.
Oh my God.
But it wasn't an expensive car, and it's a very cool car. One of 250 limited edition. It's called a Harrier Zagato, which is like the Lexus RX, but for the Japanese market. And when they introduced them, they had Zagato do special body kits on at the factory.
Okay.
And they just became legal to import. And it's such a cool car. A friend of mine actually came up from Houston a couple weeks ago and did a whole video on it. It's super, super. And it's not an $800,000, 2000 GT.
Right.
I have less than $20,000 in that thing landed in the United States.
See, and that's such a great thing. I mean, when you think about what the price of a new car is, price of a new car is banging around, $45,000 now. It's unbelievably high. And so you think about what you can get in the collector car market or the used car market now for, I don't know, like $20,000. $20,000 will buy you an enormous amount of automobile. And people, for some reason, I don't know whether they feel that they have to dive into something brand new, or if they don't have a car payment, there's something wrong with that, or whatever the case is. But I mean, I haven't had a car payment in 15 years, and I have no plans to ever get a car payment again. It's one, it's very freeing. Two, I like the hunt of trying to find something that gets me excited. And again, to your point, whether it's $3,000 or $30,000, whatever the case is, I still get just as much enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, my dad hated cars, absolutely hated cars. And the whole thing with the Porsche, he never got to see it, unfortunately. I went back, made a payment deal. In the meantime, my father was diagnosed with lung cancer, and he passed away and never got to see my car. But on his deathbed, he told me two things. The only two things I've ever listened to, because I was 19 years old and I was much smarter than he was. I should listen to everything. But he was a jeweler. He was a retired jeweler. So two things he told me back in the late 70s when he passed away was never wear a watch you can't wind, because that's when the electronic watches were just coming. And the other one was, I see you're going to be crazy about cars. Never buy a car you can't pay cash for. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't pay cash. If someone's offering you zero financing, keep your money and play with it.
Free money, sure.
Don't go into debt for a depreciating asset.
Mm-hmm. That's such a fabulous point. It's like one of the things, and this is a rule that I live by. The way that I look at it, and this is not a rule for everybody, right? But for me personally, I look at it as, if I can't pay cash for it, I can't afford the car, right? That's just the way that I look at it. And if I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend $5,000, or I'm going to spend $50,000, or if there's something, beyond that, I look at a couple things. One is that money that gets outlaid for that vehicle going to hurt me in any way, right? Because I look at it as, yes, it's insured, and yes, things could get stolen, but is it going to affect my lifestyle in any way, right? If it's not going to better my lifestyle, meaning my internal kind of well-being and make me happy, that's problem number one. Two, if it's going to affect I really can't go out to eat or do this, that's problem number two. So at least for me, I always try to keep things in perspective and purchase things that will always make me smile. Again, whether it's $2,000 or $10,000 or $100,000, it doesn't matter. It's where's my enjoyment going to come from?
Yeah, absolutely right. And if that thing is always hanging over your head, that, oh crap, I needed the money. I should have set the thing money for that. My youngest daughter just went through that. I have two girls, both married guys who really don't care that much about cars, but the girls are really into the cars. And my youngest daughter wanted a G-Wagon for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a lawyer. She's in a position that she could almost afford it, or a used one. But the sticker shock and the cost of maintenance, and she's reading all the forums and things like that. And she went out and she bought a 2007 Lexus GX 470.
I love
with
that.
60,000 miles for 12 grand.
I love that.
And is like much better vehicle, and is just loving the heck out of it.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that's got to be almost like a proud papa moment when you're like, ah, it was
Oh,
a good seat.
yeah. I'm blessed. Both my girls give me a lot of prop. Yeah, that one's especially rewarding. There's no doubt about that. And like you mentioned on, I think it was your last podcast, that driving an '80s or '90s car with fuel injection is really no different than driving a modern car. I mean, there's very little that's changed as far as
Mhm.
internal combustion engines, between in the last 30 years or so. So there's really
Yeah.
no downside to that. I have a lot of carbureted cars. They're not for everybody, but a 30-year-old car like my Infinity. I mean, we flew out to LA, jumped into it, did a couple cars and coffees, and then just drove 3,000 miles back to Ohio and never gave it a second thought.
Yeah. There's nothing, and this is a, we talk about this too, and it's funny. Like my daily is my old Bronco, my 96 Ford Bronco. And it doesn't, I always tell people it's just a big blunt instrument of a vehicle. It doesn't do anything well, but every time I get in it, it makes me smile. I fit in it great. It's a big utilitarian truck. I could put stuff in it. I can tow with it. It's kind of one of those things where it's like your favorite pair of sneakers or your favorite
Right.
pair of jeans, right? You get in it and it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. You're always going to get there. You're not going to get great fuel economy, but who cares? But it looks cool. It makes me feel good. And I just like it. It
Yeah.
just brings me enjoyment every time I turn the key. And it's
Yeah.
reliable.
I picked up a crazy little truck again for not much money late last fall. You're a Mopar guy, so you would almost appreciate this. A Dodge Rampage, like an '83
Oh,
Dodge Rampage.
you sent me a picture of that. That's right. That thing is
Yeah.
awesome. That's right.
And with a direct connection supercharger on it, fed by a 2-barrel side draft whatever carburetor. Crazy thing.
Totally efficient.
Yeah. 20. It takes 2 minutes, solid 2 minutes to warm up before you can drive it in the morning, but otherwise it's like perfect. But it was like $7,500 with 26,000 miles on it. Now, of course, I went ahead and totaled it like 2 weeks later, and
Oh,
got like three times that. I rebuilt it. I bought a shell, rebuilt the whole thing. But it's like the coolest car. They made fun of me when I paid $7,500 for it. That's how cheap those cars are, and they are a ton of fun.
yeah. Yep. It's interesting. All those kind of little, I look back now, and now you're gonna get me going on a tangent, but like a Dodge Omni, like a GLH or a Shelby Charger from, kind of the late 80s. When you talk about like interior quality, they were basically built off Chrysler's K car platform.
Mm-hmm.
And the interiors are pretty bad. They're just that, they're plastic, they're cheap, they're this, but they're so much fun to drive. And those
Right.
peaky little turbocharged motors scream.
Yeah.
And if you buy a vehicle and you understand exactly what it is, how it's built, the time period it came from, the materials that were used, and you enjoy it, your expectations are such that doesn't bother you, you will enjoy the hell out of it. There is nothing about it you won't like.
Right. Yeah. That's a big part of it, right? You have to be accepting of the car's flaws. That's something you decide that's something you're going to live with. It's kind of like getting married, right?
Yeah.
By the time you get married, the honeymoon stage is kind of way over by the time you get married. So you realize and you say, okay, this is what I can live with, and then you get to appreciate it and enjoy it, and becomes
Yeah.
part of the personality. When I bought my first 356, I knew it was loaded with Bondo, and I think the driver's floor was an old stop sign or something like that. But it worked. It didn't matter. That
Right.
sign is still there. It's still serving me well. And you get to appreciate it and understand it. And it's not an issue. It's as long as it doesn't
Yeah.
strand you or get you into trouble.
Yeah. So how many miles do you think you put on that 356?
It's got to be, because I was commuting to school in Cleveland for a while in the middle of winter, Cleveland winter. Okay, but back in the day,
And
I
it's
hate to say it,
356.
yeah. Well, and I'm kind of an environmentalist now, but back in the day, the winter, the thing to do is you oil spray the bottoms of your cars with old motor oil,
Mm-hmm.
and then just set them on the street, let them drip overnight. But I'll bet you, I know I got over 100,000 miles. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, three engines and 2 gearboxes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
See, that I think is great. And that's, the last couple of podcasts, you're right. I've kind of been on this tirade about trying to motivate people to get out and drive their old cars, because Ryan and I had recently gone to a museum, and we tried to film some of these cars, and it was the cars were stunningly beautiful, but the problem is they didn't run. And so you have these beautiful pieces that should be out on the street, and that when they're not, they simply sit and they deteriorate. And we go to shows all the time. You go to Cars and Coffees, you go here, you go there. And my first question to a lot of these guys are, these men and women are, well, how often do you drive it? And some will say, well, I put, 200 miles on it last year. Oh, okay. Others will say I put 10,000 miles on it last year. Okay, that's great. And enjoyment comes in many different forms. And I've learned to kind of accept that. I've learned to, as much as I can't stand, see, that's even bad. I shouldn't even say that. As much as I am not a lawn chair person, because I'm going to offend everybody, I don't want to do that. If the car brings that individual pleasure by sitting in a lawn chair and staring at it, then so be it. Fine. That's great. But I always think about, a lot of people, the majority of people don't go to car shows. So where are they going to see them? Well, they're going to see them on the road when they're actually driven. And I just remember so many experiences as a kid where I would have seen that Porsche or that muscle car or that Ferrari or that, whatever it was that left an impression, for the simple fact that the owner had just taken it out and driven it on some random Monday or Tuesday or Saturday. And I just happened to catch a glimpse of it. And that was a big part of my growing up, was coming in contact and having memories like that.
Yeah. And driving old cars every day like I do, what you find is that even people who aren't into cars like you and I and the people listening are, they have some kind of memories and some kind of appreciation.
Yeah.
You can bring a smile to somebody's face just by being there. And they may know nothing about cars. If they look at it, it's different. It makes them smile. Their kids point at it or something like that. It's just kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
I can always talk to my enthusiast friends about cars and go to a car show and expect to have these conversations. But like when you're at the gas station or at a restaurant or just kind of going down the street and somebody starts asking you about it, they know they don't have a clue. That's the most fun thing ever.
Oh, it's great. It's funny. Not that long ago, my wife and I were out, and we have an old 91, or what was it, 90 grand Wagoneer, like a wood paneled Wagoneer, right?
Oh yeah.
And awesome. It's an awful truck. That's what I tell everybody. I'm like, it is a tractor. It is an 8 mile to the gallon, solid axle, leaf spring front end, the same in the rear. It hasn't
burned down to the ground yet.
Nope, hasn't burned down. 171,000 miles, still kicking. But it is one of those vehicles that is universally loved. And to your point, not that many people know much about them, but when they see them, they all have that memory. Like my neighbor had one, or my uncle had one, or my this had one, and it just brings back. It starts that conversation, which I always feel is wonderful.
Well, that particular vehicle, I remember like 80s and 90s movies, like the rich family always drove a wood grain Wagoneer. AMC didn't have any money to run ads or do any kind of engineering, but they were masters at product placement.
They were. It's very funny. So I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in New York, right? And so everybody that had a Wagoneer was basically a professional, right? You had and this was back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. You had the husband would generally have whatever sports car, and the wife would generally have a Wagoneer or something along those lines, or vice versa. But it was always a very kind of affluent thing to have a Wagoneer. Right, and it always cracked me up because they were so terrible. And when you look at what Jeep did with that is basically an unchanged vehicle from 1963 all the way up to 1991.
Yeah, I'm a big Brooke Stevens fan. That's one of his greatest designs.
100%.
Yeah.
But what cracks me up is if I take the grill off my 91, I can literally insert a grill off a 76 and put it right in, and it actually has the double headlight slots to put. I mean, they were just, oh my God, the mileage they got out of that thing was astonishing.
Yeah, and that's another cool thing about having a car like that you're not buried in. You can really kind of customize it, do that stuff yourself. Parts are kind of still out there, and again, you're not worried about changing the authenticity because it's going to decrease the value by 25%. if it does decrease the value by 25%, not so bad either. So
yeah. Oh, so this brings me to another question for you. So last week, I think it was last week, we did the podcast on resto mods, and it was about, putting new technology into your older vehicle so that you can enjoy it and that it enhances your experience. So, I mean, I've just done this with two of my Daytonas getting all revamped. My Charger, after 20 years, I put power windows and air conditioning. It's the greatest thing on the whole planet. What is your feeling on that?
listen, I'm all for if somebody has a car, I'm all for whatever they want to do with it, right? I'm a little sad if you take a perfectly original low mileage car and use that. I mean, but that's kind of the historian in me that doesn't care for that. But ultimately, it's just a car, right? It's not, something that's not Parthenon. But here's what I don't understand. I have a 58 Corvette that was customized by George Barris.
Oh, wow.
And it's in perfect condition. So in the best day in the world, I could sell that car for maybe $100,000.
Right.
A perfectly restored 58 Corvette is maybe $150,000 to stock. People are paying $450,000 for these resto mods 58 Corvettes at Barrett Jackson. Which, listen, if you're happy, but they look at them, they don't drive them. The only reason to pay that kind of money is, again, you guys said it on thing, is that you can start the key. That the way it looks is the only thing that's old about the car. Everything else is done to be a driver. So I don't understand why people would spend that big money on a car that was built to be a spectacular driver and not drive it. Now, my 58 Barris Corvette drives like shit. I mean, they're really, they're not great cars. Look at some of the old Barris customization magazines.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't shy about the shoddy work he did. They look beautiful, but what was behind that stuff wasn't so
garbage.
Right, absolutely. And listen, the C1 Corvettes weren't that well engineered to begin with,
No.
So,
no.
But so someone's kept the looks of that and then put, an Art Morrison chassis under it, and LS motor and all this other stuff. Drive the heck out of it. But the majority of these cars that get bought that are the best drivers of their example don't get driven, and that's what I don't understand. If you're going to buy that, if you're going to get a resto mod that is like a perfect driver, you just love the old looks, and drive the heck out of it, I say that's what it's all about. But I don't understand it. Again, they can do whatever they want with their money, but that's what I understand about that part of the hobby.
I agree with you 1,000% on that. I mean, I look at that, and I know people who've done this. I know people who have built these amazing cars, and to your point, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $700,000 or more in these vehicles. And it's interesting because it gets to that risk reward proposition, right? Like, is the risk of driving a $500,000 car, if I stack it, going to go? Is that going to surpass the 2 years that I had to wait, or the 3 years I had to wait for it to get built, or the 5 years that I had, whatever the case is? And I think the same goes to if you're ever going to buy a new performance car. Like, all these people that go out and buy these huge, big dollar 911s or Ferraris or whatever they buy, and they don't go to the racetrack. Right. That, to me, is it just doesn't make sense. Here you have some of the best automobiles in the world, and designed by some of the best engineers in the world. And by not using the car for the way that it was constructed, you are killing those poor people. You are negating everything that they've done only for you to say, I own this. And that drives me insane. It drives me absolutely insane.
Bring it closer to home with the Hellcats and some of the, Super Camaros. Half the C8 Corvettes that are going out there, just those cars that they'll get driven to a car show once a week or something like that and back.
It's, when we go to the racetrack, and I used to do a decent amount of instructing, and when we were there, we would always have people that showed up in whatever it was, right? Either their Corvette or their Porsche or this and their that. And they would be so timid and so careful because they always felt like they were over driving the car when it was, they could never overdrive the car. They just didn't have the skill set to do so. And generally I would take them out and for a lap or two, and it would just completely open their eyes to, oh my God, I can't believe the capability. And maybe I was driving at 6, 7 tenths. Like, I wasn't going that hard, but I was going harder than they had ever driven the vehicle. And, it was always that conversation after we came back in to say, you own one of the best vehicles ever produced. If you want to get the most out of it and the most for your money, learn how to drive it properly, learn how to enjoy it, because, driving a GT3 RS on the street and shifting at 2,500 RPM, not okay.
No,
Not okay. Right. Taking it on the track, having fun, shifting at $8,000. There you go. That's where, the enjoyment comes from, at least for me. But again, I always feel bad that I always kind of like crap on these people that I'm like, you're not using your car for how it's supposed to be used. And I just feel like a schmuck. So I don't know what the right answer is. I just,
Well, again, like you said, it's what enjoyment they get out of. A few years ago, a friend of mine brought the C7 Corvette that he bought a few years ago. He said, "Hey, you haven't driven it. I want you to drive." It was brand new when he bought it. It had like 1,500 miles on it. I said, "Sure, I'll drive." And I took it around. And when I put it in fifth gear, he said, "It's never been in fifth gear before."
Oh, God.
It had for like 2 years at that. But he loves cleaning his car and keeping it dust free. He's one of these meticulous people. And his pleasure was seeing it in his garage and keeping it clean.
Yeah.
Hey, more power to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
yeah.
with me, if I know it's going to rain one night, I'll push my car outside. let nature take care of it.
So let me ask you this. What would you say is your worst car?
Boy, that's a hard question, because there are probably a lot of potential candidates for that. The worst car I ever had, I just sold to a friend last year. It was called a Lita Caballero.
Okay.
The crazy story. There was a farmer in Post Falls, Idaho, where he invented some machine that feed chickens on. So he made a bunch of money. And he decided he wanted to get in the car business to give his sons a job. So he struck a deal in the late 70s to buy bare Chevette chassis from General Motors. And he put these crazy Bondo-laden fiberglass bodies on them that were just absolutely miserable. So imagine a bare bones Chevette with like 400 pounds added to it. 400 pounds of ugly added to it. And so I actually had a couple of those. I would say right off the top, that was probably my worst car. Right now, and listen, when I say it was my worst car, doesn't mean I didn't like it. I truly enjoyed it.
You own a couple, so.
Yeah, that car, that was one of the cars that you would drive that car down the road, and everybody, even if they were laughing at you, you made people happy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that was one of those cars. I tell you, the one that a lot of people would consider to be not a great car, I bought a few years ago on Cars and Bids, a couple of years ago. It's called the Hyundai Stellar Executive. So in the mid 80s, Hyundai went to Canada before they came to the United States. So they test their market for 1 year to do like a luxury car. I call it the original Genesis. I don't think Hyundai would agree with it. They took the Stella, which was their medium grade car, body designed by Giugiaro, but on a Ford Cortina chassis, because that's what Hyundai did originally. They were current licensee for Ford. So it's Ford Cortina chassis, a Mitsubishi 4G32 engine. So like the slowest thing, with a 1-barrel carburetor. And they put this body designed by Giugiaro, and the 3-box thing that he was doing back in the mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Not a bad looking thing, like you'd see like the Mitsubishi AMGs and stuff in the period. So it's really kind of an attractive body, but slow as molasses. They put every possible doodad and stuff on it, and it's just slow, and it blows smoke and stuff like that. It was $3,000 on Cars and Bids.
Right.
But the story makes me happy. It doesn't really make me that happy to drive it because it's so slow and stuff. I got $3,000 in it. Actually, even the way I bought it, I put a bid in on it, and I got outbid at the last minute. And the guy who outbid me came to his senses and didn't follow through on the deal, so I ended up buying the car. So I would say that a lot of people would say, even though it's a good-looking car, actually I went ahead and had one side painted because it wasn't so good. It was just, yeah, I'd say maybe that. Okay, to answer your question, that's a long way to get that car. Let's say the Hyundai Stone.
Okay, so that, and I think it's a great. I think that's a great thing. I have a real problem if I see something that's old and really well maintained. And my problem is not its problem with it. I always want to buy it because you understand the care and the love that somebody has given this vehicle for 20, 30, 40 years. And it always blows my mind. And I'm always like, oh, I want to be the caretaker of that. Like, I want to do the same thing for it. It's I keep thinking of most of the cars that I own are that as 10 to 12 years old, and some of them are 55 years old. And
right.
I can't get that out of my head. But when I see other people with these kind of older vehicles, like there's a gentleman around here who has a 67 Firebird, and he drives it every single day. That is his daily driver. And I cornered him in the supermarket one day, and I was like, I see you all the time driving this thing. He goes, oh yeah. I go, when did you buy this? He goes, 1967. And I go, okay. I said, daily driver? He goes, daily driver since 1967. I said, how many miles do you have on it? He goes, oh, I don't know. We go, maybe 400,000 or 500,000. And the body of the car, it had dings, it had scrapes. It was a driver. He goes, yeah, I replaced the motor. I think it's my third motor and my fourth transmission. And, and I go, well, what caused you to hang on to this car and drive it for so long? And he said, when the car came out, I fell in love with it immediately. And I had no money. He said, but I thought I'd miss an opportunity if I didn't buy it. And I promised myself, if I had this car, I'm going to keep it and I'm going to drive it forever. And he goes, it was a promise that I made to myself and I made to the car. And he goes, I've had cars come in and out of my life, at other point. He goes, but this has always been my favorite car. He goes, and it's part of my family and it's part of my history. Nicest guy in the whole world. But it was such an endearing story. It was kind of like you with your 356, where he still drives. And he's like, I'm in Northern California. He's like, I've lived here my whole life. He's like, it doesn't rust. He goes, right. I don't have to worry about that. And he goes, it's just simple mechanics. You can put it back together. But it was a well taken care of thing. And I said, would you ever sell it? He goes, no. He goes, it's in my will. It'll go to my family. He goes, but the car will never be sold. And he goes, and for him, it was just an old car. It wasn't a quote unquote 60, Firebird that was in such great. It was just his old car and nothing more.
Right.
But it was great to hear that story.
Yeah, and it's the same way with my 356. I mean, I had a bunch of 356. I mean, literally, I've had over 100 356s since.
Wow.
And I kept my old B coupe where I should have kept the Carrera Speedster and the Carrera Coupe and all that other stuff. But that car has just been special. My kids know that it's it's going to be around when I'm gone, and whatever that they do with it. I don't care. At least it's part of the family. But you touched on a thing. The thing I hear a lot, especially where I live in Ohio, that I can't drive in the winter because it rusts. So, and that's it's really not the case at all. It's a minimum amount of care. And I joke about washing. I don't like washing cars, but in the winter, since I've been driving old cars every day, once a week you wash it, you spray the underside real well, take good care of it. My Infiniti convertible never sees a garage. And I'll tell you, it probably looks a little better now than when I bought it in LA, 3 years ago, and with minimal amount of care. So, the excuses that no, I can't let it sit outside, can't do that. That's baloney.
I agree. I totally agree with that. I think, I think, and again, it depends on the person and how much they covet the car and what they're using the vehicle for. But I also think that having one vehicle, if you're fortunate enough to be able to get one or more, having one that just stays with you as it kind of keeps you grounded. Like for me, I don't know for you if it's the 356. For me, it's my old Charger. That's the one that I always say everything else could go except that car will never leave. And it does. It keeps me grounded. I always tell everybody, if God forbid something ever happened to it, I would never buy another one because it's not that car.
Right. Yeah. Same way. If the 356 ever went away, I don't think I'd ever buy one. I mean, like I said, I've had a bunch. I love them. To me, they're magical cars. They're worth. I don't care how expensive they are. They're worth every penny. Even though, they're so expensive. Even though they made 77,000 of them, because they're just one of those magical cars that came along that you don't, I mean, nobody can put a finger as to why they're so special, but they drive great, they're
Yeah.
wonderful, they're just endearing. But I don't think I'd buy another one if it went away. But I have no, fortunately, I've got a bunch of other cars that I don't have to worry about it ever. You know,
So
I'm stuck with, go ahead.
no, keep going, please.
No. In that same vein, I've got another car that I've had for 25 years now. And it's kind of the other end of the spectrum. It's kind of an expensive car. It's a one-off prototype that was a road and track cover car in '57. It's at the Studebaker Museum right now. It just did a stint for a year at the Peterson Museum. And, you know, I'm kind of stuck with that too, because I'm the fourth owner and no living person has ever sold that car. The guy that had it built kept it till he died, went to another person who kept it till he died, went to another person.
Wow.
So, you know, I think karma would come back and do something to me if I ever sold it. I was watching comedians in cars getting coffee the other day on the reruns, and Seinfeld was taking Seth Meyers. And listen, Seth Meyers knows nothing about cars, but anybody knows 911 is easily identified. They turn the corner, and Myers says, Seinfeld says, "Well, this is what we're taking." And Myers says, "Well, what kind of car is it?" And Seinfeld kind of gives him a look. He says, "Well, it's a dead man's car." He kind of gives him a look. He says, "I bought it from the family of a dead man, and the next owner's going to buy it from the family." So,
Yeah. Well, well, let me ask you. I mean, you know, I'm sure you look at a bunch of cars every day, right? Like I know I do. Like the end of the night, 300-400 cars online, every auction, everything, just because that's my decompression time, right?
sure.
You
Yeah,
look through
absolutely.
stuff. You know, sometimes we talk about kind of future collectibles. What do you see now? And like you and I talk about driving old cars, and one of the reasons is because of the technology. They're easy to maintain. They're, you know, I look at new cars now with all the tech. Do you think do you think anything bought in 2023 is going to be maintainable 50 years down the line? Or do you think it's going to be, or you think the definition or the idea of a collector car is going to change? And do you think there's a cutoff, almost like a cutoff point where, well, that was made after 2023. You can't maintain that. So we're just going to throw it in the garbage.
Yeah, no, I think 100%. I think that the collectability and the maintenance of the great cars, right? Uh, I was talking to a friend this afternoon, and he's got a big collection of coach-built Italian sports cars from the 50s. And you know, they're little, they're not cheap, but they're softer now than they were 2-3 years ago. But you know, classic cars kind of did that about 20 years ago. The big American classics, 16-cylinder Cadillacs, 12-cylinder Chevys, Lincolns, they all got soft. But the really stellar examples of all those have come back, and you know, Duesenbergs are selling for more than they ever have. Everyone 5 years ago was saying, "Oh shit, you know, the Duesenberg market is crashing." Well, the really best examples of all those cars are back, and a new major collectors come back, and they've matured into the role,
Mm-hmm.
and they've matured both from an appreciation standpoint, but also the ability to step up and pay for the cars. And I think the same thing is going to happen with the cars that are today. I can't tell you which cars to go out and buy because I don't think about buying cars that way.
Right.
But I think there always be an appreciation in the market. And listen, you can maintain anything at some point. I'm fortunate to have good friends who appreciate my insanity for low production, one-off cars, and we make parts. That's part of the deal.
Yeah.
And you know, heck, with 3D printing and all this other technology coming
Yeah.
through, making parts is going to be a heck of a lot easier than it has been, you know, in the past.
You know, it's like I always look at, I kind of look at 911s. 911s are always kind of the staple, right? Like they generally don't go down in value. Maybe a couple do here and there. But I look at the tech that goes into the cars now, and you know, it's like, well, are you going to be able to reproduce that in 20 years? And I guess to your point, well, the answer is yeah, because tech's only getting better and better and better and better. So,
Right.
I mean, if we can't, then I guess that's a major problem, right? If we're still
Yeah,
advancing, but
well,
you can't reproduce old tech.
listen, I'm a lot older than you are, but I think you're closer generation to mine than you are to like a 20-year-old
Oh
today.
yeah.
And you and I are more into the tactile things, into the mechanical things. They're much more into the tech. And just like, guys our age are still kind of doing the stuff with the mechanical things, they're going to be maintaining the tech stuff that interested them that was coming out when they were 20 years old. So it's just an evolution.
So as far as, having that one car that always puts a smile on your face, you have many that put a smile on your face.
Yeah,
Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
I'm really blessed in that respect that I do have a lot, and everyone that I get into almost kind of changes because something's a little different. You're reminded of something that really made you happy. Some cars is one thing that makes you happy. Other cars is like the whole experience that makes you happy. But yeah, we rotate our cars. Usually, like on a Sunday, I'll put 3 or 4 cars near the garage. I have too many cars, and I'm blessed to have a lot of space, but it's not ideal space. So I have to jockey cars to get them near the doors. So we'll do that like at the end of the week and for the next week. So I have 3 or 4 cars, but then once in a while I'll pull one out. And this Harrier Zagato that I've been driving, a couple of my friends said, you're driving an SUV. I said, it's just making me happy. I'm not used
Yeah.
to having cup holders and Japanese navigation. Little ladies that talk to me in a language I don't understand. But so it's that. But then I also have like a car that I drove right before I came to Greece, which I really miss, is my Excalibur. I have a '66 Excalibur, the original Excalibur Roadster. Super fast car. In '66 it was faster 0 to 60 and quarter mile than a small block Corvette or a Cobra. But people don't appreciate that because they know what happened to Excalibur down the road. But that car is just a brutal, raw experience, and you got to love it for that, and I love it because you can put it away and not worry about driving it.
I love the fact that your collection is so eclectic that it almost seems like you'll just walk by something and go, well, that just makes me happy, and then you're like, I think I just want that. I think that is, if I'm far off, telling me, but from what I've seen, that feels like the way it generally happens.
Mike, it goes beyond that. I don't, a lot of times I don't say I want it. I just end up with it, right? For anybody that thinks that I'm smart enough to have a collection strategy, they way overestimate, my intellect.
Well, you know what? I think it's brilliant. I think that if if people are fortunate enough to be in that position where they see something, whether it's good, whether it's bad, and it just makes them smile and it makes them giggle, and they could go out and purchase it. And even if they don't keep it for a while, even if they don't keep it for a long time, but at least they get to experience it. I think that is just the best. And I always tell people, you can always sell it. You don't have
Right.
to keep everything you buy,
And that's and you don't have to spend a ton of money. I did this with what a Suzuki X90 is.
100%, totally.
I bought a friend of mine had a dealership down in Central Ohio. He had a Suzuki X90, and he dealt like with more American 40s, 50s, 60s cars. Got the X90. It was cheap. I bought it from him. I drove the 40, 50 miles home, and I said, "Yep, that was my experience. I'm glad I did it." And 2 weeks later, I sold it for either what I paid for it or $100 either way.
Yeah.
And it was like the greatest thing ever. I experienced it. I could say I had it. I got a picture of my daughter's huge dog inside, which was great.
Yep.
And it went on to a young kid who's loving it and fixing it, making it a better place. So
Yeah.
yeah, and it was like $4,000 or something. Again, you can have just as much fun with a super cheap car like that,
Yeah.
and not worry about it.
Well, Myron, let me ask you. So we're coming up. This has been a very quick, we got almost an hour. What advice do you have if you had to give advice to somebody who's just looking to get into the hobby, whether they're JDM or European or domestic, regardless of their income level? What advice would you give them?
Don't buy for investment. That would be number one. I think that's kind of a given, and I'm not going to use that as my answer, but that would be like the overreaching thing. If you're thinking about buying for investment, talk to your stockbroker. Do something like that. So as long as you don't buy for investment, go out and experience as many different types of cars as you possibly can. Because like me and the X90, I always thought I would love that car, and I loved it for 40 miles, but I didn't want to do that. So go, I'm stupid. I don't go test drive cars. I go buy cars and then drive.
Right.
But go out, test drive. If you haven't had a lot of experience, test drive a bunch of cars. Don't overspend like we talked about earlier, because listen, you can be just as cool and have just as much fun for next to no money. As if you're doing it for image or doing it for profit, just find another hobby, find something else to do. But test drive, determine what type of vehicle you want, and then you can kind of sort out the different choices you have. But if you like Econoboxes, if you like the CRXs, if you like Corvettes, Camaros, whatever, if that feels good to you, go out then just buy the best example you can afford.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I think that I think, to your point, not buying it for investment. I think if you do buy it for an investment, that takes the enjoyment out of it, because then I feel like you won't drive it, or the owners won't drive it nearly as much, because, if something happens to it, I lose my investment, and then you lose your enjoyment. That's the other part, you just lose your enjoyment. So
and the other thing I tell my friends too, who are asking, like friends who are looking to buy like their midlife crisis car or their retirement car or something, they think they want to buy like a 50s Corvette or 60s. I said, well, be prepared to be cleaning up oil leaks. Be prepared to break down at the worst time possible. It's going to happen. It's part of the experience. And I usually steer them into like a new Lexus convertible or something.
That's smart. That's generally a smart move. It's funny because I think, having grown up with carburation, I just put a ton of money into my old Charger. The one thing that I didn't touch was the carburetor, because we always ran great. And literally last week I took it in to just get a little body work done, because it's been beat to death. And on the way down, the carb just started acting up, and it was sputtering and backfiring. I think the power valve in the carb went, and I was like, son of a bitch. But you just kind of go, okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's part of the experience. So let me ask you, Pebble Beach week is coming up. Any chance you'll be at Pebble Beach in Monterey this year?
No, only because last year I wasn't planning on being there. And we've shown cars at Pebble Beach before. We've been involved with the Japanese event that's there every year too. Last year I got a call three weeks before the event. I was here in Greece with my wife, and got a call saying that having a Japanese event, can you bring this car? And oh, by the way, if your book's going to be ready, we'll give you a place to relax. Well, the book, we just had our sample books, and again, no one had ever published an expensive book on Japanese cars, so I couldn't give up the opportunity to go. So I went with 3 weeks' notice. I abandoned my wife here. So this year, I promised her wasn't going to do that, and I did that after we applied for a car for a class they're having on the show field. It didn't get accepted, which made my decision easy. Pebble Beach is great if you're showing a car, you're involved in an event or something like that. I don't like going just to be a spectator.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally get it. I mean, we're fortunate that we live close to it. So even if we drive down for a day, like I can drive down in the morning and be home at night, and it's not that big of a deal. But I was asking because if you were there, I would have loved to have seen you in person, said hello, and just thank you for not only A Quiet Greatness, but for everything that you kind of bring to the hobby, and just, just always a pleasure.
I don't think I bring anything to the hobby. To me, it's a very selfish thing, because I met so many cool people, and I've gotten to experience so many things, not just, in the United States, but really all around the world with our kids and our family. And it's just a fantastic hobby. Again, if you kind of do it for the right reasons and live within your means.
Yeah, agreed. Well, let me ask you finally, where can people find A Quiet Greatness, which people should go out and take a look at, because it is just an outstanding, outstanding volume series of books. Where can they find everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Buy the book. It's we couldn't get any of the big publishers to buy it because they didn't want to take a risk on a Ferrari quality book on Japanese cars, but we've been fortunate that we've sold over 80% of the print run. We don't plan on reprinting in English. So aquietgreatness.com or quietgreatness.com is the website. The only place you can buy that is online, or Past Diners Bookstore in Detroit, or Auto Books, Aero Books in Burbank. Those are the only two bricks and mortar stores where they are. But online is the easiest. In fact, we just sold a couple to California today. We sold to 29 countries, which is really kind of. And then on the social media things, I'm either Myron Vernis or Junkman356. So pretty
Okay.
easy to find. Pretty active on Twitter and Instagram. Stephen Brooks on Facebook. Just
Okay.
Instagram and Twitter are the big thing.
Okay, fair enough. Well, sir, thank you for coming on the podcast again. It is always great to talk to you and kind of get your insights into the hobby. And that's it. If you have anything new that's coming up in the collection, obviously give me a shout. More than welcome back anytime to just BS about cars, because that's what we love to do.
And if any of the listeners just have a crazy question about a car they want to buy or something like that, I'm really good about answering stuff on.
Okay, Myron, thank you as always for coming back. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Keep us posted on what you're doing. And folks, if you have any questions for Myron, hit him up. Instagram, probably the best place to go, I would assume. Instagram or Facebook?
Instagram or Twitter.
Instagram or Twitter. And that's it, sir. Enjoy the rest of your time in Greece, and we'll be talking to you again fairly soon, I hope.
Thanks again. Thanks. Appreciate being on board, and always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.